Hi, I'm Diane McKinley, and I'm here to talk to you today about building reading stamina. Now, I got a question recently from a principal about building reading stamina, and she was mentioning that her school, her teachers were having a little bit of difficulty with building reading stamina in their students. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. My name is Diane McKinley, and I have been in education for over 20 years. And now I own a company called Encompassing Education, where we provide high-quality professional development for educators both on-site and online. And so we're going to talk about building reading fluency here just a little bit. But before we do that, I actually want to hit on something called Neuro Plasticity. If you've never heard about neuroplasticity, it actually is about your brain and its ability to learn new things. And so I recently was reading an article on Edutopia by Sarah Bernhard. And in that particular article, she talked about the fact that our brains are constantly growing. And that's really important to talk about with kids. We want them to understand that our brains are something that we constantly are growing as we learn new things. And so when I was in the classroom, I would talk to kids about this, and when they would learn something new, I would grab my head and say, "Oh, your brains are growing. Do you feel them?" And of course, they would say, "Yes, we feel our brains growing," and get really excited about it. And so it's important, no matter what age your students are, that you're actually talking about how their brains grow. And so the very young ones, you can talk about it in that way, but with older children, there are actually studies that have shown that when you talk about neuroplasticity with students, they actually end up achieving more because they believe that they can. And it's true neuroscience. So when we're talking about this, one thing that's really important to remember is that when students repeat or practice an activity, their neural networks actually shape themselves according to that activity. And when they stop practicing, the brain will eliminate those connections and those connecting cells that form the pathways. So really, practice makes permanent. Now, that is not to say that doing an activity like multiplication tables over and over and over and over again is really going to help students to make really huge connections. Instead, that's one little piece. But when we're talking about making connections and practicing something, we actually want students to practice it in a variety of ways so that their neural pathways, those neural networks, actually get stronger because they're connected in so many different ways. So the more times the network is stimulated, the stronger and more effective it becomes. So now that we've talked a little bit about the brain, I want to talk to you about 5 ways that you can help students build reading stamina. And again, I'm going to talk about elementary students because that's typically where we're talking about that stamina. However, if you are watching now or watching later and you have questions about middle or high school students and how to help build their stamina, I'd love to answer your questions. You can either ask them live or you can ask them in our comments section after if you're watching the video on a recording. So let's hop right in to talking about how you can build stamina with your students. The first way is really to vary your process. So when we're talking about a variety of processes, we're talking about during your reading block, making sure that you're letting kids read to self, read to a partner or someone else, a group of people, and also to listen to reading. All 3 of those areas are ways that they need to be practicing them. Oftentimes, teachers will just try to use sustained silent reading as an opportunity for students to practice and to grow their stamina. However, it's really important to vary that because of a variety of reasons. Because sometimes some students already have a really good stamina with reading to themselves, but when they're in those other situations, it might decrease, or vice versa. There are many, many students that are really not very good at reading to themselves, either because they start to attend to other things or because they're just become disinterested. And so the variety and process is very important. The second thing to think about is ZPD. You might not have heard about this for a while. It's been around a long time, but zone of proximal development is really important when we're talking about building stamina. We want students to be successful with what they're reading. And so zone of proximal development is the same thing in today's language. We talk about having just right books. And so we want to make sure that when students are doing any independent reading, that they're actually choosing books that are at their independent level or their just right level. That will allow them to practice what they're reading and build their stamina over time and not struggle so much. If they have something that's much too difficult, they're more likely to give up and stop, and their stamina won't be increased. Or if they're reading something that's much too easy, while it might be fun for them, it's not going to keep their interest for a long time, and it's also not going to help them grow. So you want to make sure that they've got their just right books in their zone of proximal development. Now, if you're working with them in a small group, obviously you want to be at their instructional level rather than their independent level. And so you can build reading stamina with that as well while you're working with them in a group. Just make sure when they're on their own, they're at their just right level or their independent level. Okay, so the third piece that I want you to think about when building reading stamina is to talk about goal setting with your stamina. So it's really important that you're helping students to grow that stamina over time, but they need to know where they are and where you want them to go or where they want to go. So you're going to help them to build in goals as they move along. And so if you have a student, a very young student who might only have 2 or 3 minutes of independent reading that they can do, you might want to move them up to 5 minutes. You would set a goal with that child, and then you can use lots of fun things to do this. You could use a little egg timer, or you've seen those great bookmarks that they sometimes get at the book fair or other places, sometimes the dollar store, that have like a little timer at the top of the bookmark, and they can use that as well. So really important to help them set goals along the way. The fourth piece that I want you to think about is not only the variety in process like we talked about in number 1, but in number 2, it's the variety in product. So just like we would do with student choice, we want to think about ways that students can interact with this particular topic. So we would give them lots of ideas. So you want to think about letting them read in groups. So maybe they have a reading club, or they've got a literature circle, or you've got a project or an activity that they might do. And so you want to give them lots of opportunities to be able to interact with that, because some students might like to read silently on their own. Then you have other students who it's going to be far more impactful for them if they're then able to work in a literature circle or in a reading group, and they can talk about what they've been reading. They'll get more interested, and it will help them build their stamina as well. Okay, we're to the final way that you can help students build their stamina. That's way number 5. The 5th one is consistency. Consistency is so important. It's really important to make sure that students have opportunities on a regular basis to practice building their stamina. So if you're talking about using your literature block, you're thinking about how you can make sure that every single day students have time to practice building that stamina. If we only practice sometimes and we don't practice others, remember what we talked about with neuroplasticity is that the network is far more likely to be strong and be stimulated if we do it on a regular basis. If you don't, it becomes much more inefficient. In other words, practice makes permanent. So you want to make sure that students have lots of opportunity. This is one of the areas that I think really is a struggle sometimes for teachers because they've been practicing along the way where students are being asked to read 15, 20, maybe even 30 minutes to build their reading stamina. And then they get to the end of the year and they're going to be given some nationally normed test or some statewide test, and they've got to sit for an hour and a half. And teachers are frustrated because at that point they're expecting them to be able to do that, yet they never practice building up to that piece. So it's important to think about your end in mind. How long are you going to want them? What's your ultimate goal of how you want them to sit and be able to interact with whatever they're reading? And so if you're doing that, you want to think about, if that's where I want them to be at the end, how would I back that up and measure that out throughout the year so that students have the opportunity to grow their stamina over time, and it's not like, boom, all of a sudden I just want you to have, this long amount of time where you're sitting and working on something. So it's about thinking about those incremental steps as you go along the way. All right, so there they are. Those are the 5: variety of process, zone of proximal development, goal setting, variety in product, and consistency. Now, if you were listening to some of this and you want to dig a little bit more deeply, we have a couple of options for you. We've got some online webinars that are going on this month. One of them is called Lovin' My Literacy Block, where we'll really talk about stamina with students. And the other one is student goal setting. So both of those are options for you to join. We'd love to have you there where we'll dig even more deeply. You can find our webinars at www.incompassinged.com. That's encompassinged.com. And click on our Lounge and Learn link at the top, and you'll see our webinars listed there. We hope that you will join us. We hope you found this helpful. Have a wonderful day.